So you've probably heard about psilocybin microdosing, right? People report all sorts of things, from boosts in mood to enhanced creativity. But here's the catch. Actually proving it scientifically, that's a whole different ballgame. How do you even measure an effect that's supposed to be, well, barely there? A really fascinating new study suggests the answer might be hiding in plain sight, or more accurately, in the way we talk.
So let's get right into it. The big question these researchers were asking is pretty wild when you think about it. Can your words actually give you away? Could the way you talk, the words you pick, how much you say, create a kind of tell, a signature that reveals you've taken a microdose?
And this really gets to the heart of the puzzle with microdosing. On one hand, you have all these glowing anecdotal reports, right? But then, when you put it under the microscope in a proper placebo-controlled study, the evidence gets, well, murky. It's just so tough to separate what the substance is actually doing from the incredible power of just expecting an effect. This whole situation tells us we need a better tool, a more sensitive, more objective way to measure what's really going on.
Okay, so enter our new high-tech tool, natural language processing, or NLP. Basically, think of it as using super smart computers to analyze language. They can spot patterns in how we speak that a human ear might just totally miss. The hope was that NLP could find some kind of hidden, measurable signal, a real, objective fingerprint of a microdose. So how exactly did they set this all up? Let's pull back the curtain and take a look at the design of this really clever experiment. All right, so what you're seeing here is the basic blueprint of the study, and they used what's called a double-blind, placebo-controlled design, which is really the gold standard for this kind of research. Here's what that means. Over 2 weeks, people got both an active microdose and a placebo, but the order was totally random. And here's the most important part, the double-blind bit. Neither the people in the study nor the researchers knew who was getting what and when. This is absolutely crucial if you want to try and remove the power of expectation from the equation. Let's break down the who, what, and how. The who was 34 healthy native Spanish-speaking volunteers. The what? Well, 1 week they'd be on a placebo, just an edible mushroom, and the other week they'd get an active microdose of psilocybin cubensis. And the how is key. The order was randomized, and like we said, everyone was kept blind to which week was which. So imagine you're one of the participants. Your weekly routine was pretty straightforward. First, you take your assigned capsule. Next, you sit down for an interview where you just talk about how you're feeling, your mood, your creativity, all that stuff. And then, at the very end of the week, you have to make a guess. Did I take the placebo this week or the real microdose? Now, keep that last step in mind because it turns out to be a huge piece of the puzzle later on. Okay, so the experiment is done, the data is collected. Now what? The researchers took all those interview recordings and fed them into their NLP models. And this is where they found the first big clue. Something was definitely there. And here we go. This graph shows the first major finding. What you're looking at is a comparison of the language people used when they were on the active dose, which is labeled PSILO, versus the placebo, labeled PCB. Right away, you can see there are some clear differences, right? So let's zoom in and see exactly what those differences were. So, 2 really distinct patterns popped out of the data. First, when people were on the microdose, they were just more talkative. They were more verbose, using significantly more words to answer the questions. And second, their language was literally more positive. The NLP analysis gave their words a higher positive sentiment score. Pretty interesting. In fact, the signal was so strong that they built a machine learning model. You can think of it like a digital detective that could analyze a person's speech and predict whether they were on psilocybin or a placebo with about 80% accuracy. That's a really strong signal. It looked like they'd found it, the language signature of a microdose. But the story isn't over yet. This is where things get really fascinating. Because in science, you always have to question your results. The researchers asked one more question, and it led to this incredible twist that changes everything. And it all comes down to the power of belief. Okay, remember how at the end of each week, the participants had to guess if they got the placebo or the microdose? Well, that little guess turned out to be the key. It let the researchers split the group in 2. So the big question became, what happens when you look only at the people who were successfully blinded, the ones who couldn't tell what they took, and compare them to the ones who were unblinded, the ones who guessed correctly?
And here it is. This is the big reveal. Look at the graph on the left, panel A. This is the blinded group, the people who had no idea what they took. See how the blue and red are all mixed up? The model is totally confused. It's just guessing. The language signature, poof, it's gone. Now look at panel B on the right. This is the unblinded group, the ones who correctly guessed they took psilocybin. The difference is night and day. The separation is huge. The model can tell them apart with over 90% accuracy. The entire effect? It was all coming from the people who believed they were on the drug.
Let's just state that again because it's so important. The language signature, the extra talking, the positive words, it was only detectable in the people who correctly guessed they had taken the active dose. For everyone else, it completely disappeared. That is a genuinely stunning result. Okay, wow. So what in the world does this all mean? Let's take a second to unpack these results and think about the huge implications they have for psychedelic research. You know, the study's authors really said it best themselves. Expectations play an important role in the perceived effects of microdosing. This doesn't mean the effects people feel are real, not at all. It just means that where those effects come from is a lot more complex than we might have thought. So let's wrap this up with the big takeaways. First, yes, the language changes, talking more and using more positive words are absolutely real and measurable. Second, these changes appear to be driven not by the drug itself, but by the expectation of being on the drug. And third, this highlights a massive challenge for all of psychedelic science. How in the world do you untangle a chemical's effect from the immense, undeniable power of belief? And that leaves us with this final, provocative question to chew on. When it comes to microdosing, is the power really in the substance, or is it in the story we tell ourselves about it? This study suggests that maybe, just maybe, the answer is a bit of both, and that our own language might just be the key to figuring it all out.